parents who do not have monitoring software on the phones, who are not checking into the phone, I guess, what their kids are doing, whether it's through communication or whether it's through following up with the kids. Basically, kids are in this vast frontier that is the internet without anybody holding their hand, without anybody watching where they're going. And that, in my mind, is a very scary thing. Look at this. This is a stat that really cracks me up from 2018. They did a study or a poll of kids and the way that they like to communicate and interact. And they took statistics from 2012 all the way to 2018 to show the changes in how it is that our kids, teens, and tweens are interacting with each other. And what's incredible is that if you look over the span of time, in 2018, our kids' new favorite way to communicate is no longer in person. It's not sitting down and talking with each other. It's not calling each other up on the phone to meet up and hang out. It is now texting. Now, texting has overtaken the desire to meet face-to-face and talk to each other. And that's a pretty powerful thing. Now, when kids are so ingrained and interested in social media and applications, and you look out, if you ever go onto the App Store and just type in a word, you'll get dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of potential applications that you can use. And as parents, you look at these, and half of them you may not even know what they are. Many of us are familiar with some of the bigger ones, but some of these smaller applications can actually be very powerful. They can also be very dangerous, depending on who's using it, what it's being used for. Some of you may look at the titles on here and say, I've never heard of that. Some of you may recognize many of them, but regardless, how do we as parents keep up and know what is good and what is not good for a child to have on their phone? And that's one of the sincere difficulties that we have these days, because these things are ever changing. So let's talk about what social media apps your kids are using. So let's look at, first of all, back in February of 2016, a study was done about kids and teens' favorite, I guess it's teens and young adults, their favorite social media applications. Now, something that will be common in all of these is what we call the big three. So the big three right now is Snapchat, Facebook, and Instagram. We'll talk a little bit more in detail about those applications in a little bit. But in the social media world, those three are king and have been king for a very long time. But back in 2016, you also had other applications like Kik or Vine or Google+, where back in 2016, for instance, Kik, 30% of teens and young adults were using Kik. Vine, 1 in 4 were using Kik. Using Vine. Google+, 1 in 5. So what happens then in a year's time? Well, this is where things get interesting. 2017, what do we have? We have the big three, but where are the rest? They're gone. They're completely off the chart. These apps that 1 in 4, 1 in 5 of teens and young adults were using are no longer on anyone's radar, and that is how fast social media changes. And we see this jump again. Look at Tumblr and Musical.ly. Now, Musical.ly eventually will turn into TikTok, but it was a completely different application with different features and different dangers, frankly. But Tumblr and Musical.ly were still on the radar of our teens and young adults in 2017. So let's see what happens when we jump forward to 2019. Again, we still have our big three as the primary social media applications that kids, teens are using, but where did the rest go? They're gone. They've been replaced with things like WhatsApp, TikTok. Again, Musical.ly sort of morphed into TikTok, but there was a break in the middle when that happened. And now we have a whole new set of applications that are becoming popular that are sort of in the background of the big three. Now, this chart is really interesting because what we see is sort of the development and progress of the popularity of various applications. You can look at I guess the best thing to look at is Facebook, right? Facebook was sort of the original social media app. Maybe you could say MySpace and those sorts of things, but Facebook really just took over. But if you look back in fall of 2012, when it was at its peak, it has completely crashed in terms of the most popular social media network for teenagers. As of 2018, Snapchat had completely eclipsed Facebook. Why is that? Hate to say it, apologies if you have a Facebook account, but Facebook is now for us old people. The kids don't want anything to do with Facebook. There's also a lot of things that you can see on here that have completely disappeared. You see Google Plus, you see Tumblr, which is no longer even, I can't even remember if Tumblr's around anymore. If it is, it's very small. So how is it as parents that we know, or how do we keep our kids safe, I should say, in an ever-evolving world of social media where applications are being created, they're becoming popular, and those that are popular are ever evolving and changing in terms of what actual capabilities those applications have. So what I want to submit to you as a parent myself is there is a sort of a three-principle approach that I would strongly encourage you all to take. The three principles are for you to understand the dangers of social media, know what is installed and what is accessed on your children's devices, and communicate with your kids. The most important part is the last. Communication with your kids about social media will define how they do. It will define whether they are the ones that you have to worry about getting in some real trouble or some real danger online, or whether they're the ones who are going to have the right tools to go forward in a world that is surrounded by social media. So let's talk about the dangers. Now, I want to talk a little bit about various social media apps and things you may need to know about them. Most all of us have an idea of what Facebook is, whether we do or do not have a Facebook account. Part of the reason I still talk about Facebook is because Facebook is sort of what many people imagine social media is. And I think it gives a little bit of a perspective to see how many different features and different types of applications there are out there that aren't a Facebook clone. We all know it as our classic social networking site where it allows the postings of photos, videos, texts, internet links. There's live video streaming. Back a couple of years ago, I was saying how it's a relatively new feature, certainly not new anymore, but Facebook does allow people to communicate over live video stream. People need to know that it does allow the use of geolocation. What's geolocation? Well, if you ever pull up Google Maps and you see that little marker showing exactly where you are on a map with GPS coordinates, there is the ability for you in Facebook to, whether it's through a posting of a photo or a video or simply selecting where you are, to let others know. Presumably, you're aiming to show your friends and family exactly where you are, but it also will be available to anybody else who has access to your Facebook site. So our teens have the capability over Facebook to share their specific location with others. The other thing about Facebook that has been picked up by other social media applications is the idea of tagging. Many of you are familiar with it. The idea is when if I post a photograph on my Facebook page and I tag my sister, then what that shows everybody, or what that essentially does is creates a link of that photo to my sister's Facebook wall. And she then would have the ability, and oftentimes it's not even something she can control, that photograph will actually be posted on her page as well. That's something that becomes relevant for some of our later discussions in this presentation, but tagging can be a really great thing, a great way to expand the social side of social media, but can also be a very dangerous thing, and I'll explain why later. So what are currently the most popular messaging apps for teens and for kids? Snapchat, Instagram, and WhatsApp. WhatsApp is actually a much smaller app, but what it shares amongst these other two is a capability that really brought these three to the limelight. So these are all multimedia messaging apps. They allow for, frilling up of photos, decorating, filtering, and sharing those with friends, family, and unfortunately sharing them with strangers. They're also able, some of them are able to connect and interact with other apps. So for example, you can connect, you can create a link to an Instagram post in Facebook, et cetera, et cetera. But why are these so popular? What is that singular feature that made them skyrocket over Facebook in terms of popularity? Well, as we all know now, and something that was sort of, I don't know if it was revolutionary or at least alarming initially, was this idea that in these applications, you get to take a picture and then you get to set essentially a self-destruct timer. And that means that when you send that picture or that video or whatever it may be to a friend or to a stranger or to somebody else, the idea is that that photo is no longer something that will remain on that person's phone. Now, we all know now, and hopefully you all know, that the reason that these skyrocketed is because we entered the era of sexting, where kids and teens were taking pictures, whether they were simply risque pictures, pictures in their underwear, or even nude pictures, and sharing them with others, whether it was peers or others, with the idea that, hey, they won't actually keep these, they can't keep them because they're just simply going to delete from their phone. Gone is how it's sort of advertised and how a lot of kids and teens sort of think about these things. Well, it wasn't long that people figured out how to save these images so that a boy or a girl or a teen who sent images of themselves to a friend or to a crush or somebody like that was able to take a screenshot and save those images on their phone so they could keep them, so they could share them and show them to other people or even post it on the internet. Snapchat responded. Now, we all know that Snapchat designed this deletion figure for one reason and one reason only, and that's because they knew that we were sort of in the sexting era and that it was something that was going to be a very popular feature for teens. So ever the organization looking out for our kids and teens, Snapchat decided that they were going to add a feature that alerted someone that they were taking a screenshot of their photo. Now, first of all, it's a little odd because does that really help? The screenshot's already taken. Doesn't that mean that that picture or whatever that you sent somebody is now saved and gone or whatever it may be, available to post on the internet? Regardless, they figured, hey, look, if you alert, then, fool me once, never get fooled again. And now you'll know that this is not a person you should share with. Of course, we all know that the internet is a vast place with vast amounts of information and a lot of people looking into how it is that they can break the rules. So it didn't take long that people were posting articles on how you can get around that whole alert and gather all sorts of risque or nude images from people without them even being notified that it was happening. There are some lesser known apps and features that I want you to know about as well, partly because they're becoming more popular, partly also because, frankly, they're going to be the types of apps that have features that will probably be adopted by other apps going forward. So let's talk about those. Many of you are familiar with a very quickly growing social media application called TikTok. TikTok, as I mentioned earlier, is sort of the new embodiment of what used to be Musical.ly. Essentially, it is an application that allows kids, teens, adults, anybody to create user-generated music videos. Now, I put music videos in quotes because most TikToks, if you look through it, they're not really music videos. They have music in the background a lot of times. In fact, I think they're supposed to have music in the background or have some sort of audio track playing with them. But it's no longer what has sort of been advertised and what you'll see on commercials as recently as tonight in Monday Night Football, where they're advertising TikTok as a place where kids can make music videos and sing and dance, and you see grandma dancing to some music and it looks really funny. Well, that's just not necessarily what is being posted or being shared on these. Many of the videos on TikTok have highly sexualized or even sexually explicit content. Now, TikTok has stepped up and claimed that they're trying to eliminate any nudity or anything like that. The problem is not all things are appropriate if they're not nude. There's still sexual content and really some even just verbally sexual things that are still being posted on there. There's also violent content as well. These TikTok, the way that it works is you simply just start scrolling through your phone and random videos and images will come up, potentially tailored to the ones that you click like on or whatever it may be. So your kid, your teen may not even know what's about to come up next on the screen, nor will you necessarily have the ability to control what media is being placed before them. Now, there is a setting that a parent can set or that a child can set on TikTok that identifies if you are under the age of 13. By the way, not all 14-year-olds should be seeing, or not all 13 and 14-year-olds should be seeing some of the stuff that's on there, but there's a setting that can put or can identify the user as being under the age of 13. What that does is that limits their access to potentially explicit content. It limits their ability to post things and share. The problem with that, and the problem with all of these social media sites that have quote unquote age restrictions, is that there is absolutely no real way to regulate who is claiming to be a particular age. And what that means is, just like, if you go on to many of these websites, they say that, you put in your date of birth. I remember years ago, maybe they still do, but in order to get onto a website involving like Coors Light website or something, you'd have to put in your date of birth. But you can put in any date of birth that you want and you can still have access. So just because somebody is under the age of 12 or under the age of 13, I should say, does not mean that they would not have the ability to change their date of birth and be granted access into those other sections. Let's talk about Discord. Many of you have heard of Discord. Many of you have not heard of Discord. So Discord is a social media website and application that allows for real-time texting or voice chat, like over the phone, but also video chat, just kind of like what we're doing right here. Discord also allows you to be able to share photos, videos, just like most other social media applications. The reason Discord seems harmless is because it is a gamer-based platform. And what that means is Discord really started in a lot of ways so that gamers, people who are playing Xbox or PlayStation or over the PC, would have a place where they and their buddies or even a broader group could create a forum and a link where they could all chat to each other just amongst each other while they're playing video games together or multiplayer video games on the same team. That is no longer what Discord just is. It is used frequently for that purpose, but there are now topics all over the place on Discord where people go to post things, to discuss things, to have live video chats. There are no parental controls. A parent does not have the ability to restrict content or access to content as of right now on Discord. And Discord does have access to a lot of what I've deemed not safe for work channels, where we're talking about things where there's potential for nudity, potentials for live stream, things that people shouldn't, or kids really shouldn't be having access to. The only verification that you have to get through is essentially checking the box to say that you are 18 years of age or older or whatever it may be. Discord is something that we in our unit have, over the course of the last few years, have had numerous cases come up about where a teen meets an adult, or better yet, an adult meets a teen or allures a teen over Discord because they become gamer friends and then eventually make efforts to meet the child and then ultimately can engage in sexual abuse of that child. Certainly our county is not the only one. This story relates to a 2018 case where a 14-year-old girl who had met somebody over Discord and thought that he was fun and cool and eventually told this guy where she lived, was met with a reality of a guy coming to her residence And the mother, who lived in Virginia, ended up actually shooting the guy because he was coming into the home to meet this child and likely to try to engage in sexual contact with the child. So be very wary. Discord is not just a video game chat session room. It is something that has broad content and a lot of potential for dangerous, inappropriate meetings with adults who may not have the right reasons for communicating with teens and kids online. Telegram is a lesser known app, but it's not something that's necessarily exploding in terms of popularity, but it is popular, and I suspect that it's one that will be used more by predators, and I want to explain why. So it's very similar to our current messaging apps. One of the things that it really advertises is that all of the message data is encrypted, meaning there's essentially a code that's inputted in these, and I'm no technical whiz, but it means that only the sender and the user can read the message. It's also kind of aimed at the idea of third parties jumping in and obtaining messages that are going through the internet. They wouldn't be able to open it, at least that's the idea. That's not necessarily harmful. It is something that could potentially be used to avoid police detection and that sort of thing. But this is what, in my mind, makes it potentially a more dangerous tool for those interested in luring our children or interested in communicating with kids or obtaining images from our kids. And that is that the texts and the images and the videos that are sent, everything is cloud-based storage. What does that mean? Well, the thing with cloud-based storage is that it's not stored, and there's no data stored on the phone itself. It's all stored in a private server that's in the internet. So that means if I am, somebody who ends up sending messages to a kid and obtaining images from a kid, then I can hit the delete button. And instead of having data on my phone that is incriminating to me, that police could execute a search warrant on and obtain that information from, it's gone. It's not even saved in these servers where the Telegram cloud-based storage is. You couldn't even execute a warrant on Telegram. And so that makes it really scary. These secret chats that self-destruct, that similar to Snapchat, are not something that still can be obtained. So Snapchat and those deleting texts or those deleting images, that's all advertised as being gone, but they still remain in Snapchat or Instagram's servers, and we can execute warrants to obtain that information. That's the scary part about cloud-based storage, is that it leaves no trace on the phone or on the server itself, which gives me great concern that that is going to be a preferred type of app, those that are cloud-based, of people who are trying to track down kids, who are trying to communicate with kids and lure kids. So let's talk about sexting. Sexting, unfortunately, is something that kids are being exposed to more and more. And many of us as parents are going to look at it and say, my kid's 12, my kid's 11, my kid's 10, my kid's 9. Yeah, they screw around on the internet, but they don't know this whole idea of sexting. They haven't taken that step into this sexualized world yet. Well, here's the problem. Kids love YouTube, and kids just love the internet in general. And this stuff is everywhere. This is a screen that I took just yesterday. I went onto YouTube, and I forget exactly what I Googled, but it was either selfies or sexy selfies or something like that. And there is a litany of videos designed to teach kids the best way to take a nude selfie. This stuff is being pushed to our kids. It's out there, and it's really not hard to find. In fact, sometimes it's hard to avoid. The sad reality is, where we are now, sexting has become normal. And I say normal-ish because, I think you'll see from some of the statistics I'm about to show, it's not every single kid, every single teen who's engaging in sexting. But sexting is no longer this massive taboo where when maybe we were kids, when we were teens, it would have been really embarrassing to show body parts to somebody that you kind of liked, who's a crush, but not necessarily somebody you would do that to. Well, it's becoming more and more normal that is sort of a sign of affection, that you're sending these images and videos to people. So let's take a look. Now, this is an older survey, which again is even more concerning because in a lot of ways, we look at how things have progressed in our society, and it's probably higher numbers than right now. So if you take a look, the blue graphs represent the percentage of kids back in 2016 who sent sexts, meaning nude photos or images, and green is the percent who received those. What jumps out at me is as of 4 years ago, before really it's become even more normal, 5.5% of kids 12 years old have sent nude images or nude videos of themselves. Now, you might look at like 5.5% and say, that's not a whole lot. But if you do the math, that's about 1 in 20. And how big are our classrooms these days? Well, I don't know. I guess we're in virtual classrooms now, but we're talking about 1 to 1.5 kids in a classroom, 12 years old, has already sent nude pictures of their body or videos of their body. And by age 14, we're talking, 1 in 10? So 3 in a classroom of 30. That's really scary, and that's something that we need to be aware of, and we can't really close our eyes to the fact that this is something that's become a little bit more normal. 1 out of every 5 photographs, sadly, are shared with other people, and this means that it doesn't, as much as a kid or a teen might want to believe that their boyfriend or that their girlfriend was going to keep that photo to themselves or delete it when they were done. 1 in 5 are being shared with other people. And unsurprisingly, once it's shared with other people, more than half of those are shared with multiple people. Image goes out to 1 kid, that kid sends it to 4 others or whatever it may be, and suddenly that image is all over the place. Also unsurprisingly, 61%, more than half of people who sent images admitted that they did it not because they wanted to, not because it was their choice to, but because they felt pressure to do so from the image recipient. Let's talk about sextortion. If we were in a live presentation, I would ask people to raise their hand if they had ever heard that term before. I sure hope if I did that today, there would be a lot of hands raised, and that is because sextortion is frightening and it is common. So what is sextortion? Sextortion is the use of non-physical coercion to extort sexual favors and sexual images from a victim. What does that mean? What is sextortion? Well, let me give you an example, or I should say the typical flow of how these things happen. An offender requests and obtains some sort of sexual image from a teen or a child, or even an adult, but let's use teen as an example in this one. He reaches out, meets a teenager online, kind of bugs the teenager for a little bit, maybe flirts with the teenager, maybe sends pictures of himself that are either real or maybe not real and make him look like he's a same age peer. And then because it's just a stranger, usually, maybe it's somebody that they know, the teen relents and they decide to send a picture of some relatively tame images of their body, maybe not even exposing their body parts, but really definitely sexualized. Now that the offender has these images in the offender's possession, they then demand more, whether it's more pictures in terms of quantity or more in terms of images and videos that are more revealing, are more sexualized, are more risque. If the teen does not comply with the offender's demands, then threats arise to disseminate these images and videos, oftentimes to friends, sometimes even to family members. This is an offender who, even though he may be a complete stranger, if he has access to this teen's social media, the offender can look and see who the teen is communicating with, who the teen is considered friends with, who the teen's parents are, who the teen's teachers are, what school the teen goes to, and will threaten then to release those nude or risque photos unless they get something more, even more risque or more in terms of quantity. So what happens? Well, the teen knows that they're not supposed to be sending nude images. This is a bad thing. They don't want to get in trouble. They also don't want their friends to see their body or to see that they're engaging in this behavior. So they send more revealing images. And of course, now what happens? Now the offender has even more leverage against this child and uses new images as uses those new images as additional leverage to gain more images and even more risque type photos. In fact, it's a cycle that repeats over and over and over. And it can even come to the point where an offender is demanding sexual favors or meeting the child. It's something that we see far too frequently, and is something that is really scary and dangerous for kids. Many of you have heard of the story of Amanda Todd. Amanda Todd is a teenager who is now deceased. She was from Canada, and her story became famous because of a video that she posted on YouTube. But Amanda Todd is not unlike many of the teens that we see on a day-to-day basis. And that is that she went online. She spoke with complete strangers. It was exciting. It felt maybe dangerous to her. Maybe she was struggling with friendships and social interactions with kids her age. So she ended up sending a complete stranger who had been bugging her over and over and over, send me pictures of your breasts, send me pictures of your breasts for months that she had been communicating with. She finally relented and sent a single image of her breast to this person when she was in 7th grade. She was then subject to sextortion. This offender threatened to post the images if she didn't send more. It happened over the course of a couple of different stretches of sextortion that happened over the span of a few years, where this offender would demand that she do something, demand that she provide more images, and if he didn't, that he was going to send it. And he did. He distributed it out to her friends at school number 1. And when it got to the point where her relationships were so bad that the parents moved her schools because of the teasing and the embarrassment, he would then find out, he would pretend to be a student at the new school, find out who all went to the school, and would send images to these people. He went as far as creating a Facebook page that was essentially showing Amanda Todd's nude image, and then would tag, like I said before, would tag people who she was going to school with, so they would all have an opportunity to see it. This turned into an absolute snowball effect where Amanda Todd began to suffer anxiety, depression. She had developed panic disorder, and things started to spiral down rapidly. She began engaging in some very dangerous self-harm, like cutting, suicide attempts, other high-risk sexual behaviors like meeting male adults for sexual contact, because she was just struggling with who she was and what she was going through and what her own identity was. Eventually, she was subject to years of cyberbullying, shaming, and physical bullying. The shaming was all about how she is a quote unquote slut for sending that image and then engaging in high risk sexual behavior. And it got to the point where she eventually posted what I referenced earlier, and that was a video on YouTube where, through cards, no words, but through cards that she wrote over the course of another number of minutes, told her story. At the end of the video, she actually shows inflicted cuts on her forearm that she was inflicting on herself to try and distract herself from the pain of what she was going through. 1 month after that video was posted, Amanda Todd, who was a 10th grader, sophomore in high school, was found hanging in her home. And that ultimately made the YouTube video explode. It became viral. It became shared and kind of sort of a foundation for cyberbullying, for the idea of sextortion and the harm that it can have on kids, all because of one photo that Amanda Todd sent. That's where it all began. It's a tragic story. Thankfully, it's at least encouraged discussion and from people in points of leadership about cyberbullying, about the things that our kids are going through, and it's certainly put on the radar this notion of sextortion and the harm that it can have on a child or children in general. Worst of all, when we talk about one image, there has been a push lately, and it's basically been a battle between federal authorities of different governments and the internet, where there are anonymous chat boards where people post images of nude teens, nude adults that they have received through sexting and saved. It's gotten to the point where they have categories that are based upon what high school people go to, so that if somebody in high school has received a nude, and let's say they have a falling out with that boy or girl, they then go on the chat group that relates to that high school and can post that nude image and share it with their peers. These are websites that, because they do contain child pornography, because we're talking about high school students, are repeatedly shut down, and then they pop up in another country's website. So there was one in Holland that was shut down by the feds, and it's bounced around to Russia and other different countries where they're just essentially sharing these until more action is taken. But it's sad, it's scary, and it's tragic that a single image shared, with somebody who these teens may believe that is someone they love, is now lost in the internet forever. And these images just get reproduced and saved and shared. You can find investigations on the East Coast where they have images that were taken, on a single occasion on the West Coast, because these things are shared and traded like there's some hot commodity amongst individuals on the internet. So let's talk about those apps, lighten the mood a little bit. Let's talk about those apps that there is no business being on your child's phone. So first of all, there are your typical dating apps. Many of you are familiar with Tinder, which is a dating app that matches people by location. Bumble's one as well. Grindr and Her are two variances of Tinder that are more aimed at the LGBTQ community. And then if you don't know what they are, they simply match people. You swipe one direction to say, yes, I think that person's attractive. Oftentimes it's somebody who's in close proximity. You swipe the other direction to say, give me my next option. But they're essentially for meeting people and hooking up, especially when used with younger teens. Even though those are apps that you have to claim you're 18 years old and you have to identify yourself as 18 years old, that actually makes them more dangerous. They're more dangerous because an offender can look through and look for young-looking women, young-looking men, young-looking teens, really, who they know are underage, and can fall back on the idea of, well, hey, this person told me they were 18. So those have no business being on any child's phone. Omegle is a whole different ballgame. It's similar to a site called Chat Roulette, and essentially it connects you with complete strangers. 90% of the time when you connect with this complete stranger, that complete stranger is going to be doing something naked and sexualized, and it's a way for them to sort of expose their bodies to random strangers. It's absolutely something that should be nowhere near a child's phone. So these are easy call. Nobody should have these on their phones, especially if you're a teen. How about Meet Me? Now, Meet Me is one that we see very often. If you're a parent, you go on your phone and you see a little chat bubble with a little smile on his face that says Meet Me. You may not think much about it. Meet Me is something where kids as young as claiming to be 13-year-olds can register, but even if you are 13 years old, it would say, hey, you're allowed to use this app. There is no true age verification like many of these. And what that means is that essentially I, as a person who's almost 40 years old, can claim to be 14 years old and try to connect with people who are under the age of 18, because it puts essentially a bar so that if you're over the age of 13, you can't cross over into the 18 and older. And if you're an adult, you shouldn't be able to communicate with people who are under the age of 18, but there's no real verification. The account creation does not require a cell phone, so this doesn't require somebody to actually have data and in their own phone. You can simply create a burner email account and then create a profile that's completely anonymous to communicate. Again, they claim the focus is upon meeting new friends, but the concerning thing is these suggested friends that you're meeting is based upon location, so people who are near them. The ability to then meet in person with these individuals, these complete strangers who may or may not be who they claim to be on the internet. So Meet Me is one that we have seen multiple times where teens are either duped or purposely interact with adults, meet with them, and they're put in very high-risk situations. Yubo is something, again, that if you saw this little logo, you probably wouldn't think much of it. But really, it's described as the Tinder for teens. So it is an app that is focused and directed at teenagers to meet new friends. And you swipe right, just like on Tinder, to like somebody. It's not couched in terms of sexuality, but it very much is used in that same or similar manner. Shockingly, created by Snapchat, the company who loves to make money off of what they know teens will want. And a lot of teens like the idea of meeting people by who is attractive or who may think that they're attractive. It's a very focused app for that time in a kid's life. Again, similar to Meet Me, it is matches that are based upon location, very similar to Tinder. It really is Tinder for teens. It is not just about meeting friends. It has a massive potential for danger. And no teen or kid should have Yubo, formerly known as Yellow, on their phone. Whisper is something that's relatively new. It's becoming more popular. It's an anonymous confessional app that pairs an image with thoughts or feelings. That's a tough description, but this is basically what it looks like. You can post whatever you're feeling or whatever you're thinking in words with an image behind it. Now, the thing is that instead of this being just a place for kids and teens to vent or share with their friends how they're feeling, very oftentimes they're either the images or the texts or the text on the image is sexual in nature. It encourages private sharing, meaning that it wants you to share directly with individuals rather than just post it onto the internet. So it kind of has this double-edged sword where it advertises the idea that you can be anonymous, post your feelings both through text and through image. But it also, on the flip side, is that it tries to connect people with other individuals. And that's scary if you have a teen who is struggling with issues that surround sexuality, struggling with self-esteem, and are posting these images and these thoughts out into the internet because it feels like this open place to anonymously share, when there is some stranger on the other end who is looking for teens who are struggling with sexuality, who are struggling with self-esteem, and who very often target teens who are just in that very place. So Whisper is not something that teens should be dealing with right now or have on their phone. It has a very innocent look to it, but is very not innocent in actual practice. Now, many of you have heard of the dark web, are familiar with the idea of the dark web. For those of you who don't know kind of how it all works, the access that we have to the internet on our typical social media websites, news stations, things like that, only incorporate approximately 4% of the internet. There's a deep web that is essentially amounts to the vast majority of what the internet is, and these are things that we can't access because search engines don't have access to them. But it talks, it's medical records, it's school records, those sorts of things that are out there on the electronic internet, but are not necessarily accessible to the general public. The dark web is a whole different level. It is a place that is unrestricted, that requires very specific and unique browsing capabilities to access, that contain things like drugs that you can purchase, firearms and weapons that you can purchase, women and men that you can purchase for either sexual things, sexual acts, for violence. You can hire people to harm other individuals. And it has an extensive amount of child pornography that is accessible to anybody who gets onto the dark web. In a smaller presentation, if I knew that there were not kids present, it's a little different over the internet, I would show you just how easy it is to access the dark web. You can do it in minutes if you know where to look. I'm not going to be in educating people here today because I don't know the extent of our audience and who's listening, but just understand that this is not something that is complicated to access. Now, what people don't know, and a lot of times don't know, is that because this is essentially a complete, it's the wild, wild west of the internet where anything goes and it's mostly unregulated, there are individuals who can, the minute you connect to the dark web, if certain precautions and steps aren't taken, can immediately identify that person's location, can obtain phone numbers and addresses, and can really even contact that person, not through the dark web, but through other means like cell phones or like even face-to-face contact. It is extremely dangerous. The dark web is not something to be messed with, and is something that really kids need to know is not a place to go and should never have access to that. So, dangers, so much danger on the internet. Many parents at this point in the presentation are panicking. What do I do? How do I protect my kids from this? No internet, throw away their phones. Well, let's talk about how it is that we, as parents, have to maneuver in a society that is based on technology and that surrounds technology. Well, part of that is to know, and one of the big things that you can do as a parent is to know what is installed and accessed by your child, whether it's on a tablet, a computer, or a phone. Because phones are most commonly those devices that are so private to kids, the kids can go, rather than stretch that long cord around a wall, they can go up into their bedroom or go into another room, and you can't even see what they're looking at or what they're doing. Let's talk about how you know and make sure you know what is installed and accessed on your kids' phones. So for those of us who have iPhones, it's they recently implemented a pretty cool program that allows us as parents to assist in regulating some of these things. So this is for iOS, which means if you have an iPhone, this is, or a tablet, this is what you're going to be using. So you go to the settings tab, the typical general settings tab on your iPhone. And then if you know, if you're familiar with it, there's sort of your own bio, like you're the main user. And you go into that portion of it to a point where it says family sharing. Setting up family sharing is surprisingly simple. There are YouTube videos that can show you how to do it in a matter of minutes. So I'm just giving you sort of the broad overview here. But you go to the setup family sharing and you create an Apple ID for your kid or teen if you do not already have one that's created. You then basically they get an iCloud email address that can be specific to that device, and then you connect whatever their login is to your quote unquote family. After you do that, you go back to settings and go to an app called Screen Time, and this is the program that I'm talking about. Screen Time, once you have a child connected to your family, allows you to regulate a lot of different things, including turning off internet access or phone access entirely. You can go to content and privacy restrictions, and if you select that for your child, you have to specifically identify the restrictions to be for this individual child. You can then regulate what apps are installed or purchased or ran. You can prohibit them from installing any apps on their own without your permission and require a password that you, or a passcode that you have to type in before your child can install anything on their phone. What does that allow you to do? It allows you to be the gatekeeper. It allows you to say, wait a minute, what are you installing? What is that? And take a couple of minutes to explore whether that's something that is appropriate or not appropriate. And I'll give you guys some resources on how it is that you can do that very quickly and gain information very quickly. For Android phones, for the rest, or at least the vast majority, I'm not sure, other than iOS and Android, I'm not sure what else is out there these days. Go to Google Play, which is the on your device, your own device, and it's like the App Store if you're an iPhone person. It's essentially where you download applications. You then go to an app and install Family Link for Parents on your device. The Family Link app will allow you to create a Google account for your child if they don't already have one, and then similar to the iPhones, You then connect that account to your own Google family. The additional step you have to take for Android devices is then get on for your child's device, go to Google Play, and on the child's device, download and install the Family Link for children and teens. So they'll have a separate type of the app, same Family Link app on their phone. You both will have it. That will give you step-by-step guide once you hook onto the Family Link for children and teens on how to connect the two accounts so that the parent device has the ability to regulate the teen device. It will then, from your parent device, allow you to allow apps or prohibit apps from being used, limit the amount of time, even has the ability for geolocation so you can know where your kid is, or at least where the kid's phone is. The alternative to both of these, if the goal is to know and regulate what is used and accessed on your child's account, the alternative, and easier alternative in a lot of ways, is to go into the children's phone themselves. And you can go into that same settings and prohibit, for Android, it's going on to the Google Play app, and there's settings in terms of downloading those. iOS is the same thing in terms of general settings and screen time, and essentially require a parental passcode that you do not tell your child, that would prohibit them from installing anything until they hand you that phone and you type in the code. It's not as good of a method because kids are smart and they eventually figure out what passwords are, especially when they want to. And that way you can't necessarily remotely monitor, but both, it's a good alternative if you're worried about your ability to do the more technical stuff. But again, YouTube is your friend. You can find a lot of really quick and easy tutorials on how to deal with both the screen time and the Family Link. But there is a question, and that is mobile device management the solution? Is having a program that regulates what your kids can and can't do on the internet, is that really the solution to all of this? Well, a study by the University of Central Florida in 2018 essentially said no. It said our findings suggest that most parental control apps are just that, apps that attempt to control what teens can do online, but ultimately do little to keep them safe online. And that is, we as parents can try and regulate and block and be the gatekeepers to this media, but it's out there no matter what. They may not be able to see it on their phone, but they're going to be able to see it on another kid's phone who doesn't have this regulating software. There's a lot of study that goes into what kids tend to succeed in where we are now with this wide open expanse of information and social media. There's the question of what does more, the authoritarian parent, the parent that says, you don't get to touch the internet, you don't get to explore it all, no searching the internet, no using YouTube, none of those things, versus a parent that is involved, that is aware of what their child is doing, who tries to educate their child and supervise reasonably. And what research shows is that the authoritarian parent who puts the wall down and says, you don't get to do any of that stuff, tends to experience, the teen of that parent tends to experience more online risks. Whereas those kids who are given a little bit of freedom but are educated and supervised, they experience fewer peer problems and less victimization in comparison. And that's where we get to the final portion of those 3 points. To communicate with your child, and how important it is to communicate with your child about these things. Especially important is how to communicate with your child, because there's a lot of research shows about the way we, and even educators or people who try to teach parents about these dangers, that we do it wrong, and we teach you how to do it the wrong way. So let's talk about what doesn't work. What doesn't work when talking with your kids about dangers of the internet? Well, first of all, scare tactics. So in other words, the first third of my presentation, don't do that for your kids. That's the opposite of what you want to do. You're probably, as parents, nervous and worried seeing all of these dangers that are out there. But for kids, those scare tactics tend to not resound with your kids. There's something that will either make your kid be interested and saying, oh, that's kind of cool, or say, oh, you don't know anything. You're just an old fogey who has, a Facebook account still. Scare tactics don't work. And that's why a presentation like this is oftentimes not the best for teens, because That's not going to, the scary stuff at the beginning that we need to know as parents isn't necessarily something that's going to have an impact on them. Don't overstate statistics. Kids and teens, they're smart. They're smart and they're actually wise and savvy in a way. Maybe that's a little bit of a funny way to put it, but I think we don't always give our kids enough credit in how much that they can sniff out something that is being over-exaggerated or overstated, especially because our kids and teens know more about technology than us on a day-to-day basis. It's all they do. It's all they want to do. They want to have their heads buried in phones and talk with their friends about this new app or this new game or whatever it may be. They're always going to be ahead of us. So don't give inaccurate information, because so often we are going to be the ones who are trying to play catch up on what's going on in terms of apps and statistics. Or I should say apps and dangers and those sorts of things. Certainly don't shame your kid in terms of social media. If you are the type that puts a sign around your kid's head and takes a picture and sends it over the internet, that's not being helpful. That's not something that's going to help your kid change their behaviors. It's only going to close the door of communication with you. So shaming is shown not to assist. And most certainly don't be the person who says, don't go to this website. So for instance, if you go to your teen now and say, whatever you do, don't get on the dark web, you know what the first thing they're going to want to do is? Get on the dark web. Though the approach of saying, please don't do X is going to have the opposite effect in talking and communicating with your kids about online safety. So what does work? If those are all the things that don't work, what does work? Focusing on positive social norms. Now, I want to flip something that I did earlier, and that is the statistics of how many teens engage in sexting, whether it's sending photos or receiving photos. So don't look at it the way that I presented it to you when I was trying to explain the dangers and the frequency that sexting is going on. When you're talking with your teens, talk to them and focus upon that there are a lot of kids and teens who do not do this. As much as it should be frightening, the frequency with that this stuff is happening to us parents, talk to your kids about how it is. There are a lot of kids who don't engage in this, that this is not something that most kids do, because a lot of times once a kid believes that it's something that is common and normal, they're going to say, okay, I might experiment with that at some point. So focus on the positive social norms. Focus your conversations when you talk to your kids on their interests. Sit down and ask them, hey, what are you guys doing these days? What's like the most popular one? Tell me about it. How does it work? What do you like about it? What makes you want to get on there? Why is it better than Facebook or Instagram or whatever it may be? Kids are really tough to talk to sometimes. Teens are extremely tough to talk to, especially when it's mom and dad sitting down and trying to give them a lecture or educate them on dangers of social media. The better approach is to try and learn from them by getting them talking about what they're interested in. They can show you a TikTok video or whatever it is that they may be doing, and that'll then help educate you on who they're communicating with and what they're using, and then it'll allow you to look at some of the dangers. Don't let them shut you out. Be persistent. Make it about them and don't give up. We all know that once they hit that middle school age, especially for boys, you ask them a question and most of what you get back is a grunt. Be persistent, really focus on making them be interested about whatever they're talking about, and that will help educate you to know what they're engaged in, and then to be able to talk with them about the dangers and the things that happen. Make it personal, make it about them. This is a really interesting statistic from 2018. So the question was asked to a number of teenagers. Is the way that you present yourself on social media an accurate reflection of who you really are? Meaning, are you the same person on social media as you would be in real life? And if you look at this and you add up the two disagrees, 25%, 1 in 4 teens disagree. They look at themselves as a different person on the internet. The internet does not reflect who I am in person. They are interacting with people differently. They're engaging in different behaviors than they would if they were interacting in real life. This shouldn't be surprising. If you ever go on comment section of the news, you have people who are saying things and writing things they would never, ever say to somebody's face, but because they're behind a computer screen, they feel like there's a little bit more anonymity, there's a little bit more protection from, I guess, harm or people getting mad. And so our teens are out there engaging in social media, and they're looking at it like, hey, I don't have to carry myself the same way on the internet as I do in real life. Only 25% of those, the other flip side is only 1 in 4 strongly agree I'm the same person on both sides. So there's really a problematic disconnect between reality and the internet with our teens right now. So one way to explain it, and one way to kind of help us as parents understand what teens are doing when it comes to social media. What are we putting out there? Us included, adults. What are we putting out there on the internet? Anytime that we post, anytime that we click a like button, well, first of all, we're putting out our name. And that our name is not just on the internet. Our name is, whoever we are portraying ourselves to be on the internet, but it's also whoever we are in real life. So I, Andy Pulver, have my name as it's viewed in real life and my name and how it's viewed on the internet. Hopefully no different. I don't do a lot of social media myself other than researching things. But we're putting our name out there. Putting our name out there means that we develop an identity. Kind of like we said before, I am the same person in real life as I am on social media, or perhaps not. And then in the background of all of this, there's our reputation. How do others view us? And what teens need to know is that even though they, as teenagers, view things differently, view like they can be a different person online than they are offline, that reputation of who they are, how others view them, is the same. It's the same reputation online as offline. And so acting differently online still will impact their reputation offline. Some things that kids really need to understand, and teens especially need to understand, is if you expect to act differently online and not have it impact who you are viewed as offline, that's just flat wrong. That's just not how things work. Even though we do feel that sense of safety and like we can be somebody else online, it all comes back. And so make sure that when you talk with your kids, make sure that they understand that there's a difference between who you're acting as outwardly and how other people perceive you. And there's no real disconnect between online and offline. One tip too is, look, parenting has not really changed between the offline world and the online world. Back in the day, if I got a phone call late at night and my parents answered the phone, the first thing they're going to do is ask who's calling. Who are you calling? Who's calling to talk right now? It's a little bit late. Or we would have restrictions. Hey, look, no phone calls after 10 p.m. Either we're turning the phone off, or you better not be the one to answer because it's too late and you're not going to talk. That doesn't change now that we're talking about mobile devices. We need to be able to talk with our kids, figure out who they're conversing with. Hey, who were you just talking to? Hey, who is that, or who just called? We need to know who they're communicating with. We can't just assume that it's that when they close the door and start chatting, that it's going to be somebody who we would be okay with. And we can set time limits. Those mobile device management tools that I showed you on iOS and Android allow you to do that remotely. But there's something to be said about having a phone that is sort of an open door to the internet, not even be within the child's hands or reach after a certain time where they are very much isolated, and we as parents are trying to scrounge for a few minutes of freedom before bedtime. Most important, or one of the most important things as a parent, is being a source of support. The example I like to use is my parents never wanted me to drink or to party or to do something dangerous like drink and get behind the wheel of a car. But what they always instilled in me is this idea that if I ever found myself in that position where I'm maybe I made a bad choice or did something naughty or wrong or whatever and decided to go to a party, which is something they would disapprove of. And I was faced with this decision of either do I drive home after having alcohol or do I get into a friend's car after they've drinking alcohol, rather than do that, they would rather have me call and let them know that I'm in a bind and that I would never get in trouble if I made the choice to be safe, because they would always be there to support and help me. Now, they may have discussions with me about good choices and bad choices, but they always instilled in me that belief that if I ever got into a bind, even if I was doing something I wasn't supposed to, they would be there. And that's that safety net, that feeling like if you get into a bind, you've got someone who can help you. Too many teens end up doing something wrong online. They make a bad choice once, or they get in deep over their heads in whether it's communicating with strangers or peers or sexting or whatever it may be. That's why sextortion works, that kids get in over their head and they are frightened to tell anybody who can do anything about it. Either if it's because they don't feel like they have that support, or they feel like they're just going to make things worse. So always talk to your kids about how you will be there for them if they get in a bind, and that they'll be in a lot less trouble, if in trouble at all, if they come to you for help rather than trying to deal with those things on their own. So be there for your kids and let them know you're going to be there for them. This next example I take zero credit for. It's something that I learned in a lecture myself that I think really speaks well to how it is that we should approach teens and social media. Safety on the internet and with technology is very similar to teen driving. Now, if you are a teenager and you want to drive a vehicle, you gotta what? You gotta learn how the mechanics work, how you move the levers and the buttons and press the gas, and that means go, and brake means stop, right? You gotta learn what the signs mean, when you're supposed to stop, when you're supposed to go, turn, what lines you're supposed to be driving in between, right? And if you learn those two, you can operate a vehicle, right? You can take a test and suddenly you are able to drive. Are we just going to give, if that's all our kids know, all our kids know is how to move the levers and what the signs mean and what buttons to push, are we just going to give them the keys to our car and say goodbye? The answer is of course not. And there's a lot more that goes into teaching kids and teens the right way to operate an incredibly dangerous vehicle. Well, it's the same thing when we're talking about an incredibly powerful, dangerous piece of technology. We need to be teaching our kids the same way about technology and social media, the same way we teach our kids about driving. That is to respect the dangers, be aware that there are dangers out there, that this is not a game, that there's massive problems that kids can find themselves in. And if you're aware of those dangers, you will know the right way to respond to them or how to avoid those dangers. Kids need to know you can't, just like when you're in a car, you can't control what other drivers do. There are going to be people out there on the internet. There are going to be people out there who on social media who are going to do the wrong things. You can't control what they do. You can only control the way that you respond. And just like if there's an unsafe driver on the road who's swerving or weaving, all you can control is do your best to stay away from them, or to make sure that you are safe as opposed to what they're choosing to do. And just like that, you may have friends on social media who are doing things that are unsafe. All you need to be able to do is to control what your choices are. Be wary of who you let in the car. Not every person in a vehicle, or not every person along the side of the road is somebody who you want to hop in and drive with you. Even some friends are not the best to be sitting in the passenger seat when you're first learning to drive. And it's the same thing with social media. Not all friends are going to be respecting social media the right way, and they can lead you down the wrong path. They can expose you to things that are dangerous, that you should never be exposed to. And most certainly, there are strangers everywhere on the internet, and not every one of them should be let into your car, which is really your social media space. Recognize and react to unsafe situations. Be aware when something happens, and have a plan for what you're going to do if something unsafe happens. What precautions do you take in a car? If it's raining or snowing, how do you change the way that you ultimately operate that vehicle? Well, it's the same thing. Kids need to be alerted to, wait a minute, this person is asking me questions about personal information. That's a red flag. I need to know what to do. What's my game plan when something like that happens? And obviously, know who to call for help. Just like I mentioned before about the idea of always having parental support and somebody that you can come to, our teens need to know that there are people who are there to help them if they get into a bind, even if they're scared that they might get in trouble for the choices that they made. That is a huge, huge thing for us as parents in keeping kids safe. Obviously, just like driving a car, you establish clear expectations and limitations. You have the car for a couple hours. I want you back by this time. You have the phone for a couple hours. I don't want you to drive here, or I don't want you to surf here, or I don't want you to use this app. There needs to be a clear discussion about what those limitations are and a clear understanding. Continually communicate with your kid. It shouldn't be a one-time talk. It needs to be something where you're actively involved in discussing these things with our kids, and reaffirm when they do the right thing. Reaffirm, the good choices that they're making. Reaffirm the dangers as well. And of course, consistently impose consequences when trust is violated. If I took my parents' car without permission and disappeared and came back at 2 a.m, you think I'm going to be able to drive for a week or a month? There needs to be consequences when poor decisions are made, even though we're balancing that with being a sense of support for our kids. I want to alert you all before we wrap this up to other resources that you have access to. All of these are great. I will tell you that personally, commonsensemedia.org is probably the greatest resource in my mind in terms of social media. All you do is type in the search bar, and they may make you create an account, but it's free. All you do is type in the search bar, the app, TikTok or Twitter or whatever it may be. And it also works for movies and video games. I think it works for music as well. Don't quote me on the music thing, but it will talk to you and it will give you a 1-paragraph summary of what you need to know and an age recommendation for what age a kid should be or a teen should be before they have access to this. But it'll lay out in a matter of seconds what you need to know about that app, and you'll be able to decide really quick whether that is something that is appropriate for your kid to have on their phone or not. And the reason that's so important is if we're monitoring what apps do get on their phone and we see that they're trying to install X, all it takes is 10 seconds, 30 seconds to type it into Common Sense Media and get a feel for whether that's something that you allow or you don't allow. Cyberbullying.org is great from the bullying aspect as well, and NetSmarts has some good information. So definitely keep tabs on these, write them down, keep a link or a bookmark on your phone or your computer so that you have easy access to them. So again, in summary, understand the dangers. As parents, we have to be aware that the dangers are out there. Know what is installed and accessed on your children's devices. Don't put your head in the sand. Don't let them lock you out. You have to be aware of what's going on and communicate, because in the end, we can close the floodgates and we can tell our kids that they're never going to touch the internet, and we can tell them they're never allowed to use social media, but they will. At some point they will, and they'll be exposed to it. And in the end, before they get the keys in their hand and they put it in the ignition and they drive away, we have to have given them the tools to do the right things. If you have questions, I know we're up against time here. I wanted to give you my contact information. My email address is right there, andy_pulver@co.washington.or.us. That's the main line to the DA's office. If I don't respond to you in a matter of minutes, understand that we're very busy, especially, unfortunately, on the child abuse unit. But I always try to get back to people if they have questions. I can't give legal advice, but I'm more than happy to direct people to resources, provide information, or answer questions if there was anything that came up during the course of the presentation. So I really appreciate everybody who joined us for this afternoon. I know it's the first day of school for a lot of people. There's Monday Night Football on. There's all sorts of stuff with the wildfires. I hope you are all happy, healthy, and safe. But really, I hope you also learn and take to heart some of the things we talked about, because my job, usually, this is all about picking up the pieces once the bad things have happened. Picking up the pieces of a kid who's been sexually abused or has been lured over the internet, or has sent images to individuals over the internet. This is one of the few times that I like to be able to get ahead of those things, that I can get ahead of those things and try and minimize how often those things happen. So I really appreciate everybody who joined us for us today, and I'm more than happy to answer questions if you guys have any, either now or over in the future over email or phone. So thank you.
All right, Andy, there's no questions in the chat right now. So.
Okay. Well, in that case, you guys have my contact information, and if you ever need to reach out or have questions or curiosities, feel free to give me a call or shoot me an email.
Thank you so much.
All right.
All
If
right,
that is the end, then I will, I guess I'll be disconnecting.
All right.